This is Conspirinormal.
Okay, welcome to Conspirinormal, everybody, all you good folks out there. I'm here, Adam, and your favorite co-host, Surfiel.
Yes, hello everybody, hello fellow Conspirinormalists, members of the Mystic Crew, and those ancient adepts of the Circle of Strange Realities.
Yes, hello, yes, all that includes all of our patrons in our own, like, special secret society. So, guys, we have Michael Hughes on with us. It's been like over 4 years, I think, since I've had you.
Damn, wow.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like that long, but...
Yeah, I know. It was, I think, November of 2017, so time really does fly when you're having fun.
4 eventful years.
Yeah. Yeah, 4 very eventful years.
You could say that again.
Which we might get into some of that. But, Mike, when I originally got you on for, and we'll talk about some of the things, we're not going to spend all our time on this, but we started the year with an interview with Alex Tsakiris. And it was about a book that he wrote called Why Evil Matters. I guess that it has since come out. I'm not entirely sure, but we kind of had a little hard time with this interview, just like personally in amongst ourselves. I thought it went well. I thought it was fine, but we had to like kind of do a disclaimer, almost a disclosure. We had to do a disclaimer on that episode, which is one of the things we hardly ever do. In case anybody knows, like, you know, some of our guest viewpoints may not be our viewpoints, but we had to do one of those things. Soraya incidentally had to do one of those too, for that as well, but that was for some other things. But we got on the subject of, I guess, the Satanic Panic. We got on the subject of Pizzagate, very, very briefly. I didn't talk about it too much, but I had you on back in November 2017, like I just said, because, well, I guess you can tell the story, and the reason why I wanted to get you on for this, because because we didn't feel like we were really prepared to like counter some of the things that we said, like the McMartin Pre School case, for instance. I know kind of like the gist of it. I know but I don't know like all the background and all the details of the McMartin case. And so you know a little bit more about all this kind of stuff because you've kind of had to refute, I guess, some of this in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert by any means. And as far as my history goes, like back in the 80s and 90s when this stuff was picking up, I was swept up in it. You know, I had friends that would bring in like audio tapes from their evangelical churches talking about, you know, backwards masking on rock and roll records and stuff like that. And so I knew a lot of people that really believed this, you know, this satanic, you know, this satanic plot to just, you know, enslave people through subliminal means and all that sort of thing.
Grand conspiracy.
Yeah, I was inclined to believe it. I mean, I was a kid and I was into spooky, titillating stuff, like horror and the supernatural, and you know, and this stuff was freaky and it scared me, and so I was drawn to those ideas that, you know, that people were talking about. And then, you know, I even remember like the Geraldo Rivera special about Satan, how Satan was, you know, in all the preschools and all this stuff. So all that was sort of percolating in my mind. And then like in the late 80s and early 90s, the early internet era, I was really into conspiracies. And that was a big part of the conspiracy lore at the time, or at least a certain segment of it. The idea of ritual abuse, it's where I first learned about Project MK Ultra and just, some of the real stuff that happened, some of the terrible stuff that happened, Ewan Cameron and all the horrible stuff he did at McGill and in Canada and things like that. So there was real scary, terrifying stuff in the public record that had kind of come out at that point. So I was primed for this kind of thing. And I was a member of a lot of like bulletin boards where people who alleged to be survivors of satanic ritual abuse and, government experiments and, my labs, people had said that UFO abductions were actually done by the military and that was all for mind control purposes, and Kathy O'Brien. So I was immersed in all of this stuff and I found some of it kind of compelling, it is compelling reading because it kind of tweaks that little part of us that loves horror stories and loves like these really grotesque nightmare sort of story. And I'm a horror writer and I always read horror fiction. So this was like, oh, wow, what if some of this horrific stuff is actually real? It's compelling. People love it. And if you have a religious mindset that this kind of a Manichaean idea that there's evil in the world and there's good and it's in a constant struggle, it's super easy to buy into that stuff. So I was primed for it. I read it. I still was skeptical about, especially like the Kathy O'Brien stuff where, pretty much every famous musician and politician was, part of this,
Boxcar Willie.
Right.
Yep. Boxcar
Right. Yes. And, and just part of this, flesh-eating, cannibalistic, satanic cult. So I started to kind of think, wait a minute, some of this sounds a little too much. And as I sort of started realizing that in order to really get at the truth of conspiracy culture and conspiracy lore, I had to turn around my intellect and try to tear it apart. Because it's easy to believe it. It's easy to say, that's interesting and that appeals to my idea of good and evil. So I'm going to just start believing it. And once you believe it, you start looking for confirmation everywhere. The whole confirmation bias kicks in. And a whole part of the rush of finding a connection, I'd be on these conspiracy boards and I'd find, oh, wow, this politician was associated with this singer. And both of these guys are allegedly, part of this satanic cult. So, and you make that connection and you share it with the community. And then, you get like an endorphin hit from it. You're just building this mythology and you're getting community recognition for it. So it's really kind of a self-fulfilling sort of thing as you kind of dig deeper and deeper. But my idea was that look, if I'm going to think about these conspiracies, I should spend as much time trying to take it apart as I am trying to build it or to sort of add to it or to accept it. And when I started doing that, it really made me realize that like so many conspiracies just fall apart under basic logic. It's always the idea that there's a them out there and they do this and they, the people always say, well, they don't want you to believe this or they cover it all up. And I started saying, well, who is they? Like, tell me exactly who these people are and how they can continue to do this cover up. Like if there's this enormous cover up of satanic elite ritual people, if it's all of Hollywood and government are engaged in this doing these giant rituals, the Super Bowl is a giant Illuminati ritual or whatever, then tell me how many people are involved. How many people would have to be involved? How many people would have to keep their mouths shut? How could, decades go by without something not slipping up? And the more you start to interrogate these conspiracy ideas, the more they fall apart, and you realize like how absurd it is to believe that there is this like all-powerful elite. And another part of it is like I started hanging out with people in professional circles. As you get a bit older, you're not just sitting at your computer talking about conspiracies with people, but you're out there in the world, like meeting people in your local government, meeting, celebrities or whatever, and meeting people in law enforcement and things like that, meeting someone who's, my dad's in the CIA or whatever, and I'm like, well, your dad doesn't look like he eats babies. So what's going on here? And it's just when you aren't so insular and you start to understand like how society works and how the pieces all work, you just realize it can't be this ridiculously powerful elite manipulating everything. So I think that's what I just started turning my skepticism on some of these conspiracies, and it really started to wake me up in a lot of ways. I've been fooling myself for a long time.
Well, you really touch on something interesting, and that's you saw the way that you were engaging with this material. What's really going on with the way people consume this material? What are they really getting into? It seems like they're kind of in this occult detective thing, and they're seeking a lot of times what I think are altered states and are better understood in like spiritual and occult contexts. And the way everything turns into this overarching grand conspiracy of society narrative, it approaches like the worst elements of Gnosticism and things like this whole worldview. It's very odd. What's really going on? It's not just research about something like the Kennedy assassination or just investigative journalism. Really, it becomes something entirely different, and it affects people in different ways.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a worldview in which you can't trust anyone or anything. I mean, the easiest way conspiracy theorists shut people down when they start questioning is like, oh yeah, well that's just the mainstream media, man. And then they go on about, well, the mainstream media is controlled by XYZ, the Jews, whatever. And so you can't, even though, yes, I mean, there are all sorts of problems with the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and MSNBC and Fox, but journalism is built upon like verification and multiple levels of verification. So while there's definitely a slant to a lot of mainstream news, like if they break a particular story and there are multiple sources supporting this story, you can be pretty sure that it's substantiated, but what happens is when you become so enmeshed in conspiracies, and I've been there, so I know what I'm talking about, is that you refuse to believe anything other than the material that's coming in, that's titillating you, that's feeding your confirmation bias about what you want to believe and who you want to believe. And it's just gotten worse because, back in the day when I was deeply into this stuff, I'd pick up, a magazine at the weird bookstore where I like to shop, Steam Shovel Press or Paranoia or something like that. And you had to kind of seek this information out.
Way more subcultural.
Yeah, it was way more subcultural. And that was kind of the intriguing part of it to me.
Or it was just something weird that was like stapled to a telephone pole.
Right.
That back
and
in
it
those
could be
days,
interesting, yeah.
Xeroxed like 1,000 times.
Right. Or these zines you had to send away for. And, that's cool. That was really fun sort of cultural thing. But what it did is but what happened now, I mean, you've got your uncle and your grandmother sending each other, QAnon stuff back and forth, and how, Bill Gates is trying to microchip their vaccine, and it's just terrifying that it all exists within this kind of self-referential bubble. And you can't break into it, and you can't break out of it. Like once you're in it, social media has definitely been a big player in that. So conspiracy has become mainstream in a way I never, ever could have imagined. And it's also been pushed, I believe, expressly and purposely towards the right by a lot of different actors involved. But it's also, I mean, I think like a lot of the Pizzagate stuff just erupted out of, 4chan and 8chan and all these message boards. And some of it was people really caught up in that thing and saying, oh, well, let's look at the coded words and John Podesta's emails, and oh my God, maybe that's, child sex abuse or something like that. But really, to me, when I was looking at it, it looked like they're talking about weed, and hey, I left my weed over at your house. Can you please hold on to it for me? Something like that. And
right. They jumped to the most extreme conclusion.
Yeah.
But it was really like a game, though, and that's where QAnon obviously evolved out of Pizzagate. But you had like the instructions to the game, or the, in the this supposed FBI document with the terminology, and then you got the Podesta emails. So then, it was really a game.
Yeah, and I've done experiments with like taking two disparate elements. I did this for a message board I was on for a while called Rigorous Intuition, which was a pretty good conspiracy board. I think it probably even still exists. And people were finding like all these ties to 9/11. And I said, well, how about I just pick like Britney Spears, just pulled something out of my ass. Britney Spears, and I'll connect Britney Spears with 9/11. And I did that as an exercise. And sure enough, like if you look for connections, you start finding connections, because we're all connected, and that's like, I think if more people that were into conspiracy theories just did these little self-checks like that, and like tried to come up with the most outrageous two connections and then try to connect them together, they start to see like the process that our minds do, and how because I started to believe it, I mean, it was so like, well, wait, Britney Spears knew this guy, and he was the son of an actor who was on the plane, all this stuff. And you really can start to believe it, because human beings are really good at making connections. Like, that's how we survived the savannas. We noticed that there's this, the brush over here has been disturbed. Hey, maybe there's something lurking there that wants to eat me. We understand how to make patterns and tie things together, but that can be a dangerous thing as we see now. But it's back to McMartin. I mean, I listened to that Tsakiris interview. I have a history with him. He invited me on his show to talk about Pizzagate, and he yelled at me for the whole time. Literally yelled at me for over an hour and a half, I believe, and he never put it online, I think because he was embarrassed. But I couldn't get a word in edgewise. I had all these facts. I've written a piece online about where I refuted point by point the whole nonsense of Pizzagate, and he didn't want to hear it. But when he talks about things like McMartin, all you have to do, again, if all you do is go online and read the stuff that wants to make you believe that McMartin was a real satanic ritual abuse episode. And all those hundreds of children were taken to graveyards where people were dug up out of coffins and they stabbed them. Animals were sacrificed. You know, they were violated with knives and forks and just horribly sexually abused and played the naked rock star game and all this other stuff.
Chuck Norris was down there.
Yeah. But the thing is, if you just go and read the stuff that wants you to believe that, you can come away pretty convinced. But I think if you're going to call yourself a skeptic, and if you have that in the title of the name of your podcast, you really should act like a skeptic and go read the refutations of this stuff. And then maybe you'll see why the case was essentially fell apart. You know, after many, many millions of dollars and people spending their lives in jail who were innocent, all you need to do is just take a look at it from the opposing viewpoint. And you'll see that, no, it wasn't some grand cover up and all these people got off because everyone in the judicial system and all the jurors were terrorized by Satanists. It's just that the evidence was garbage. And when for Alex to say that the first boy who was considered, you know, the first victim by his mother was bleeding out his butt, and I think he screamed that twice on your show. No, he wasn't. He was taken to the police. He was taken to a medical examiner. They found no evidence that he had been sexually abused. He had like a rash and he had been having a hard time going to the bathroom. I've had toddlers. They get rashes and they have a hard time going to the bathroom. So at least if you're going to be talking about this stuff, read the trial transcripts, like read the facts and don't just go, you know, saying things that aren't true. And all you have to do is look at what these, like, I think her name was Key, the woman who was who was interviewing all these kids. It was horrible leading questions. I mean, anyone could read those transcripts. And then when the jurors got those transcripts and when they saw those tapes, they said, holy shit, this is awful. She's leading these kids on, you know? So, and the other thing, and you guys mentioned the tunnels too, and that's something that's still out there and circulating as well. But there's a really great paper that was an analysis of that. The archaeologist, the guy who was kind of sympathetic to the idea of there being, you know, satanic ritual abuse. And there's a really good paper that talks about what those so-called tunnels were garbage dumps that had been built by the people who lived near that property. And it followed the exact kind of structure of garbage dumps. People would dig a hole, they'd throw their garbage in it, their food garbage, you know, junk from around their house, then it would fill up, and then they dig another hole next to it. And they found things in these holes that were like the mailbox from the 1950s that belonged to the people who lived on that property and had their name on it and everything. I mean, there was stuff from the 1920s to the 1950s. There were bones, and everybody's like, "Oh, see, that proves, you know, they're animal bones." Mm-hmm. But there were things like steak bones.
Right.
The bones had cuts on them that were from like a butcher saw, and they weren't horse bones or anything like, you know, they were bones of like animals that might have lived on that property and like food that people had eaten and stuff like that. So there's just, you know, you just look at the totality of it, and at minimum, I think you have to say that, well, we're not quite sure. I mean, maybe you want to believe that something still happened, but you at least have to admit that a lot of the evidence strongly suggests that this was just a lot of bullshit and
right.
and driven by Satanic Panic, which was a real deal.
Now, on that show, which, you know, I kind of admit, like when he started talking about all that stuff, I was just like, I really don't know. I mean, I knew some things about the tunnels. Turns out I had read that article that you had sent me. I had just, for whatever reason, I'd forgotten about that. And I'd heard that there were tunnels, but it really wasn't that like big of a deal. When we did that show, I was just I kind of took the stance, and you heard it today, that like, well, maybe if there was some kind of sexual abuse that went on, it's unfortunate that all the Satanic Panic ridiculous bullshit was on that, because then it allowed it just to become a circus. And so no real justice was done. But I don't honestly think that that's what happened. I mean, I think that it was probably just, something that just got blown out of proportion.
I think so too. I mean, and that's why most of the people were let off. And that's why most of these, preschool satanic ritual cases were eventually thrown out. And with even some of the people who were children recanting and saying, God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I got talked into saying this stuff. And we know how easy it is to talk especially children. They've got a grown up sitting there who's really nice to them and is telling them, as the woman did in McMartin and in other places, these terrible things happen to the other children. Here's the doll. Did they touch you here? Did they put their finger there? And the child's terrified. And if the child doesn't answer the way the adult wants them to, then the child can tell that the adult is not happy with that. So they start to make it up. I mean, it's so simple. And when you read these transcripts, it's cringeworthy that this stuff was going on. And a lot of times it wasn't even qualified professionals doing it. It was these people.
Yeah, it was an entire cottage industry.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen the videos of these, of guys going to police departments and talking about all the satanic stuff, and going to an underpass and showing a pentagram painted and stuff like that. Like, these are kids listening to heavy metal and smoking greens and painting shit on an underpass, right? Of course it is. That's culture,
That I was kind of surprised that he did go back to McMartin and push that so much, because of course, McMartin, the imaginations that went into that, has a lot further back, precedents, going back to things like blood libel and stuff that you pointed out too. But the permutations of the same stuff from Satanic Panic era that have been endlessly recycled now, I mean, there's really not a consciousness of the 80s and the Satanic Panic. It's all just recycled stuff. So I was kind of surprised that he did go back to that, because so much of that has been so discredited. But we see these same memes that we recognize because we've been in this, when conspiracy theory is more subcultural. But that's what's weird to me. But because so much of conspiracy theory is like self-generating, you just had to get the ball rolling back in the 80s with this stuff, and it's just kept on. No matter how dubious the foundations are.
Yeah. And when I was caught up in it back in the day, there were books coming out by therapists and stuff like that who were studying it. I had a friend whose sister was a social worker, and, she was all a believer and things like that. And the media, like that Geraldo show, and it was just reinforced, and it was, again, it's titillating stuff. I mean, we all know it's terrible and it's taboo and horrifying, but we're drawn to terrible and taboo and horrifying stuff. I mean, even though, and it's like the more of a religious, deeply religious person you are, I think maybe even the more you're drawn to that versus some weirdo like me who writes horror stories and practices magic and stuff like that. Like, I think the more rigid you are and the more scared, or maybe just the more repressed religiously or psychologically you are, the more that stuff holds an appeal. it's more taboo, it's darker, and it's easier to buy into because secretly you're fascinated by it. Same with like, closeted gay men, tend to be the most homophobic, because they're like afraid of what's inside of them, and they project it outward as anger, and stuff like that. But yeah, it's weird to see it coming around again, because you think people learn. And I had a good friend who, when he was in high school, his Dungeons and Dragons club was challenged by like the local church, and they were harassing the kids and putting pamphlets all over the place and stuff like that. And that seems kind of silly now when you go on YouTube and there's like millions of people watching people play D&D and famous actors and stuff, but it was real deal. I mean, people were terrified. People thought you were going to go to hell and for playing a fantasy game. But the fact that again we're going through this kind of new satanic panic, upcycled for the MAGA crowd, it just boggles my mind. It's like these things just don't go away. They get shoved aside for a little while, and then they just come screaming back out again.
They get recycled again and again and again. I watched the today. I watched the QAnon, this report that CNN did like a couple of nights ago about QAnon and how it has its really all that adrenochrome stuff. It really just has its roots in the blood libel stuff, the killing of children, the harvesting, the taking of blood, putting it in the matzo balls. It's all just kind of like this recycled anti-Semitic tropes. And one of the things also that they talked about was one of the guy that was talking to Anderson Cooper, he even was talking about the blue avians, and that's all like the Corey Good UFO weirdness. So, and just a point that I think I wanted to make about Alex and about the book specifically was that what I couldn't really square was, and there's a lot in it that's about consciousness and all that, and that's totally fine. But then there was this whole chapter about how Christianity was made up by the Romans and all this type of stuff. And then in the next few chapters, he's talking to like Russ Dizdar and William Ramsey, which I don't know if you're familiar with these guys. William Ramsey, Russ Dizdar is one of these guys that he's pretty much like it's recycled Satanic Panic stuff. He believes that there's these altered personalities that are going to come out as they're called something called the Black Awakening. I've had both these guys on my show. William Ramsey is big on like occult conspiracy theories, especially about Crowley, and one of the books that he wrote was about the West Memphis 3 and the Smiley Face Killer 2. Yeah, the West Memphis 3 case, and how he believes that it really was done by Damien Eccles and the other two. And even though that is just something that has been gone over and over and over again, and it's like the evidence lends to it not being them
enough to get them free.
Enough to get them free, even though they are technically guilty. But there's a whole story behind that. It just seemed odd to kind of square this chapter about like you're basically discounting Christianity, and then you're talking to these really ultra Christian guys. To me, and I am a Christian, to me, it was just it just seemed contradictory.
Yeah, it's just like a blender full of bullshit, that some of these people embrace. I mean, Crowley, why are people still obsessing about Aleister Crowley? I have no idea.
But he would be happy to hear it, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's like,
yes.
Can't we find a different boogeyman than this guy that's been dead and there's maybe like 500 Thelemites in the whole world, actually practicing his religion. I've never been a Crowleyite. He's a fascinating character, but I mean, I think he was, kind of a messed up human in a lot of ways. Terrible poetry writer, whatever. But really, we're still.
Oh yeah,
Crowley's still the boogeyman these days. Like it's it's like these people. And I have no qualm with Christians. I grew up Catholic. Like I'm a Jesus is just all right by me kind of guy. But these demented people who, they've watched too many scary movies. They think, and they start to project these ideas onto the bigger world.
Yeah.
Like if you're worried about children being sexually abused and trafficked, good for you. But like, it doesn't matter if it's someone in a dark hooded robe that's abusing this child. It's just as likely to be your pastor, or Uncle Bob, cool old Uncle Bob that likes to take the kids out, for a walk in the park. It's this fixation on the occult and the demonic as like the big boogeyman. Like, come on, people! Like, just stop watching scary movies. Like,
well, that's
watch
a good point.
comedy.
Yeah. That's a good point because of your position as a fiction writer and understand the power of speculative fiction. I mean, how does that inform your way of thinking about this stuff? Because you create worlds, right? And that's essentially what's going on with a lot of these people.
Yeah, I mean, I love horror. I love spooky stuff. And that was part of the reason, just like many other people, like, the satanic ritual abuse, I thought it was just an engaging subject. It's scary to think that there's this, masterful, all-powerful, demonic, satanic cabal that is just trying to take over society and steal your children. And they, the Super Bowl halftime ritual is how they celebrate their, that's the other thing. Like, okay, if you're going to be doing Illuminati codes, why are you doing this stuff at the it all just kind of falls apart. Like, what is the logic of these world controlling groups, putting all their symbolism up at the Super Bowl? They show that we are the Illuminati,
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of this really goes back to that, the famous anti-Semite Michael A. Hoffman II, his idea of revelation of the method. So much of this stuff, especially that's gotten popular on YouTube, these ideas obsessing about finding occult symbolism everywhere, goes back to that because he believes in this formula that they have to put out things publicly that are subconsciously acknowledged by us, and that then allows them to have this sway over us, or it allows their ritualism to work, it's crazy, and it's a really weird occult thing in itself. And a lot of, you talk about this like pattern seeking and a lot of this weird stuff. A lot of that I think is kind of an occult divination in itself. So you have these people like anti-occultists, but they're actually engaging in something that I think is occult.
And they feed it, like if I was working in Hollywood and I was in charge of the next Super Bowl halftime show, I'd pack that shit full of occult symbolism just to freak these people out, and that's what people in Hollywood are doing.
Yeah, it's a feedback loop. It's a feedback loop.
Yeah.
They're not stupid. They know if someone has a music video with their hands in a triangle looking through their eye, that it's gonna, make all the anti-Illuminati pants pissers lose their.
Well, the thing is that we've probably dealt with about at least a good 15 years of this now.
Right.
At this point, I mean, a couple of years ago, you had Taco Bell saying that they were controlled by the Illuminati. So like it was obviously a joke, but I'm sure somebody on the internet posted, see, we've been telling you all along. But I think it's something that Serfiel and I have talked about many, many times, is that there's unfortunately, there is a very big lack of education in the arts and in literature, especially. Like, nothing wrong with STEM, okay? Nothing wrong with that. But when we're going to focus like solely on STEM, and we're going to let the arts and literature and mythology and these type of things not being taught, when people see these things now, they have no context.
Right. Like all the stuff about John Podesta's brother's art, oh my God, it's horrifying. It's how could someone have a picture or Maria Abramovich, cannibalistic cakes or something like that. No, that's nothing new. There's a famous painting of Saturn eating his children, a famous classical, I think, Renaissance painting, and it's the god Saturn, Goya, and Saturn's ripping into his child's throat, and Hieronymus Bosch. What could be more surreal and dark and twisted and disturbed as Bosch? None of this stuff is new, and it's so the people going off about the Podesta's art, some of it was kind of gross, some of the stuff with like kids or whatever, and I would certainly never hang in my house. I would never even want to see it. It was edgy in a way that I don't like. But all that says is his taste is really kind of grotesque, and maybe you could think ill of his character for having that kind of art, and that would be fine. But to take from that there's a basement in a pizza place where Hillary Clinton and others are drinking the blood of babies, sucking out adrenochrome and that sort of thing, it's the fact that when it first popped up, like I had people texting me, this is pretty weird, man. Like, check this out. I don't know. Maybe there is something to this. I'm open-minded. So I start looking at it. And then as it just got more and more insane, I'm like, no, just take a step back. Let's look at this objectively before you start more dot connecting, because as I said earlier, you can connect all sorts of dots and it makes total sense in your head. But that doesn't mean it's real.
And that ultimately, doesn't it come from Hunter S. Thompson, like the adrenochrome thing? It ultimately has...
That's what Robert Duffy said, yeah.
Right. It's all this stuff.
But then again, if you never read a Hunter S. Thompson book...
Right. If you have no cultural context and it just comes to you on a Facebook post from your uncle, and you read it and you go, oh my God, that's really... Or from your yoga instructor, what the hell, man? I mean, it's terrifying if you think it might be true. And then in these social media bubbles that we live in, that stuff just bounces around and gets more energy.
I want to ask you how much of this you think has been the result of a concerted effort, and for lack of a better word, actually a kind of conspiracy to promote these ideas and propel them to the mainstream. I mean, I obviously think a lot of it is organic, but it seems like, there was kind of a, even if it's just one of those ideas to, like Bannon admitted, to just muddy the waters so much. Do you think there was kind of a concerted, organized effort to push these into the mainstream?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do. And it's the most obvious example is Donald Trump saying, hey, Russia, if you've got those emails, please send them my way. And sure enough, the very next day, these emails start popping up. And it wasn't the Republican Party emails, it was the Democrats' email server that was hacked. A lot of people believe, possibly the GOP server got hacked too, but maybe it's better to hold on to that stuff. But so, yeah, I mean, it was, and I think, I'm not saying, I think some people go overboard with how much Russia is involved in active measures, but they are involved in active measures. I think it's pretty clear that they were involved in that email dump. And that's where Pizzagate began. So, but I agree, you're right. I think a lot of it is organic. I watched it happening as I was watching the stuff coming out of, 4chan and watching as people, I think some people, like I used to do, just sit around and look for clues and look for dots to connect, and then they start connecting them, and then it just gains momentum. So, if you're a foreign actor or you're someone that wants to just stir up shit, a lot of time you just have to give it that initial push, and then the people out there just take care of the rest. And I think that's what happened. I'm sure there were malign actors throwing stuff here and there. There always are. They're just regular old shit posters who just want to stir things up. But I think a lot of it is organic. I would agree with you on that.
I wonder about where Q really kind of comes from, whether or not, because there's some possibility that Q may be some like right-wing forces within intelligence or whatever.
I think it's more outliers. I mean, some of the investigative work I've seen is that guy's name. I can't really remember now, but I think he's currently living on a pig farm in somewhere in Southeast Asia. And because they started finding, locating IP addresses and stuff like that. And so I think some journalists have started to narrow it down a little bit. But again, this person, all they have to do is just start the ball rolling, and then whether they're just deranged people who just kind of organically make up some of this crazy stuff, or if it's actually orchestrated by certain folks, it's really hard to tell. But the end result is pretty clear that it's weaponized, and it's weaponized political conspiracy. Whether you're like a partisan person, I'm admittedly a partisan Democrat. I don't think there's any shame in saying that. I like to work with a certain party that represents my ideals most of the time. I'll criticize them when I need to, but this is clearly from the political right. It's been associated with the Donald Trumpian cult, which I think a lot of these people are. It's a cult of authoritarianism. It's not really even a part of the democratic process anymore.
Right.
It's full-fledged authoritarianism. And it's weaponized, and it's weaponized to aid him and his people, as we saw. We see what weaponized conspiracy can do. Our seat of democracy overrun by people who were going in there to execute our elected representatives, and it doesn't get much scarier than that. And that's part of the reason why I've been speaking out a lot about conspiracies and the danger that some of the more deranged, weaponized conspiracies can do. And but after that day, I just decided, fuck it. Like I'm not going to hold back anymore. When I see it, I'm gonna call it out and make people aware, especially in our sort of broader community that, podcasts that we all listen to and things like that. Like I finally, because a lot of the time I would hold back a little bit, and in the sake of just not saying anything or hoping people would maybe turn their ideas around. But after seeing that, like I just can't shut up anymore.
So you advocate, have been advocating, especially since Trump, this magical activism. Do you think the things that we've been talking about, do you think this is a kind of magical activism on the part of the right and the extreme right? Do you think that they have a magical strategy that involves pushing this stuff and getting people into this this mindset?
Oh yeah, it's like its own form of enchantment.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, I mean, magic in a lot of ways is all about entering into an altered state of consciousness, and that's kind of the base of a lot of magical practice. And and your boundaries get more porous when you do that. And so I definitely see, I mean, I don't know if you guys have read or talked to Gary Lachman, who has a book called Dark Star Rising,
I've had him on. Yeah.
Magic and Power in the Age of Trump. I recommend anybody that's listening who's interested in, like, you know, the idea of magical warfare or occult warfare to pick that up, because it's fascinating. It's like, it's the other side of what I've been advocating and doing, with the, you know, quote, magical resistance. And they've definitely been at it. I mean, they've been at it since the beginning with the whole Keck, the Pepe the Frog, and using meme magic and stuff like that. And if you read Gary's book, like, you know, Steve Bannon and a lot of the alt-right are very steeped in a lot of very right-wing magicians, like Alexander Dugin from Russia, who's a very, very powerful force of the alt-right, or the kind of fascist, crypto-fascist, neo-right, whatever you want to call it, and also very into occultism and magic. Because I think when you look at politics, I mean, politics is kind of an occult end thing, because you've got symbols, you know. I mean, we all know how the power of seeing like the swastika on a flag, and seeing those Nuremberg rallies, and just the power and the energy that's whipped up at a political rally. We know it's all about symbolism. We know it's all about words and chants and music and things like that. And it's so, you know, politics can be a very powerful occult experience for a lot of people. And so, yeah, they've been at it. I mean, they're definitely been doing it from the very beginning. There's a thing they were doing, posting on 4chan or 8chan, I can't remember which, but you just get a random number when you post. And if you got like a certain series of numbers, that was considered like especially magical and effective. And a lot of these folks really believed that these Pepe the Frog memes that they were doing were helping Donald Trump. And that was their goal. But really, like, check out Gary's book. It kind of lays it all out.
Yeah.
And that magic and occultism has always had a very right-wing element to it as well. You know, Julius Evola, and you know, and I think that's because magic deals a lot with power. Yeah. And power, you know, people that get really like thirsty for power, you know, maybe fall prey a little more to like the kind of the fascist side of things.
Yeah, because we've talked about a lot. I think the best way to understand how this stuff grips people is through that kind of magical or spiritual lens, because people, you can't argue with people who are kind of under the spell, and it is like enchantment. It is like a spell, effectively.
Yeah, that's a perfect way of putting it. I mean, you look at these, you know, QAnon has its own shaman. I mean, this guy, and you know, I see a lot of people in my circle who are like kind of the spiritual, like the burners, you know, the Burning Man folks, and like and the yoga people and things like that. And they've become like, they've fallen prey to a lot of this stuff that I would have never have thought would have grabbed them. And the term conspirituality, I think, really has taken hold, and is a really good word to describe the melding of conspiracy with spirituality. And I've kind of seen it coming, because you look at alternative medicine. I love alternative medicine. You know, like I think alternative medicine is like a good adjunct to allopathic regular medicine. But it also, and same in, like, let's say the UFO community or something, because it's a group of people that's been marginalized by mainstream science, by mainstream academicians, and they've been told that what they believe in is silly for so long that they've just turned the mainstream into the enemy. And it's kind of a natural reaction for a lot of these people. The story I tell was at a Fort Fest for Forteans and ufologists and stuff like that. And I found myself in a room, after everybody had a few drinks. It was after the conference. Everybody's sitting around in a hotel room, just talking about this and that, Bigfoot, chemtrails, blah blah blah. And I'm fairly skeptical about a lot of things, but the discussion went to climate change. And I believe the science of climate change. Like, I don't believe scientists all around the world are trying to, foist some, bogus mythology on us for whatever nefarious reasons. I think the scientific community is pretty worried about what's happening with the climate. And I think all the data are pretty clear about what's happening and what's causing.
Come on, Mike. It's Agenda 21.
So
They have to revise that to 31 now.
So we start talking about this, and I'm like, well, I kind of go along with the science. And within about 10 minutes, the whole room people were screaming at me. And I realized there was not a single person in this entire room who even thought that there might be like a semblance of truth to the fact that the planet's heating up because we're pumping so much greenhouse gas into it, and that's affecting the climate. And that made me sort of back off a little bit and go, what's happening to these communities of people, a lot of smart people, but I think they've been taught for so long that the mainstream rejects them. And so that they can't embrace anything mainstream. That's what mainstream scientists say. Well, they don't believe in UFOs, so why should I trust what they say about climate? And it just leads to this sort of relativistic, echo chamber where they don't trust or believe anything, and then the real garbage can come in, and the more appealing garbage that kind of tweaks their titillates them, or it fulfills things they want to believe, takes over. So I think we've really kind of dug ourselves into a deep hole with not teaching people discernment and not teaching people how to separate good information from bad information, and to be inquisitive and truly skeptical, skeptical in the way that Robert Anton Wilson says, you question everyone's BS, but question your own BS in particular.
I feel like there's an inability in a lot of these people to really do some searching and figure out that the way they arrived at these conclusions has been planned out, and that there's often money, and invested interests in them having these beliefs, and those people propagated these ideas to give them those beliefs. It serves somebody.
Yeah, it makes money. I mean, all the podcasts out there that are trafficking and just the dumbest nonsense, garbage, conspiracies and things. And I think a lot of the time, some of these folks don't even believe the stuff that they're putting out there, but they get clicks and they get advertisers. I mean, there's a podcast guy I went to head to head with about Pizzagate, and then he disappeared after he kind of challenged me to refute Pizzagate, and I refuted Pizzagate, and then he just ghosted me completely. But I look on his blog to this day, and he's trafficking, and COVID's not real, and encouraging people to go to these clubs in LA, night comedy clubs and restaurants that are now speakeasies, because you can secretly get in there and not wear a mask and stuff like that. And does that worth the couple of bucks you get per every 100 clicks on your website to be telling people to do something dangerous like that in the middle of a pandemic? And the pandemic has shown like this is like the crazy tip of the crazy iceberg.
Yeah.
I work in the public health environment at a university. I talk to the epidemiologists and things like that. And I can't believe these people haven't just given up completely, and said, fuck this. I'm gonna take a ship to a deserted island and live there because human beings just can't seem to be sensible and do the right thing and not be selfish and accept science. Like, no, Bill Gates isn't trying to microchip you. People are just trying to save your fucking life.
On our Patreon, I said a very similar thing to what you said, in that I really believe that a lot of this is about hits. It's about getting more and more patrons, more and more listeners, more and more subscribers. I mean, me and Sergio, we're in this podcast world. We know how that is. We know how that feels. But it's just like, you can't just say just bullshit like that. And it also just, I think, comes from just a stance of just like contrarianism.
Yeah,
is really what it is.
And
like if I'm edgelord. Yeah, if I'm contrary enough, and some of them, maybe they don't think about it. Maybe that they actually feel that way. But there are some, like you said, that I feel like, no, I don't think you actually believe that. I think you may actually just be wanting to keep your listenership. Because if you said something against it, you might lose 50,000 listeners.
Exactly. And it is edgelordism. It's, and the thing I've been called because, whenever I advocate science or talk about, partisan politics or just being engaged politically or activism, a term that's been thrown out of me, other than neoliberal, which I think a lot of the people that throw it out don't even understand what the hell they're saying.
That's very specific.
Yeah, exactly. Is a normie, oh, look at these normies. And it's got this, the conspiracy world in particular, especially some of the communities I used to be in that I pulled out of a while back, because I just couldn't handle what was going on there anymore, is this, it's a weird sort of edgelord elitism, right? It's like, oh, you vote, oh God, why would you vote? It's all a scam, voting is for sheeple. Or look at this person, they're an activist and Black Lives Matter or something like that. Don't they realize that like George Soros is the one funding that and pulling the strings behind it? It's this weird nihilistic disengagement and just this looking down on anything that is actually involves like civic participation, or working with other people to get something done. It's like you're in your little basement and you're on your laptop and you're connected to all your other edgelord pals, and all the other people who are out there are just these sheeple, that are just stupid and just doing pointless things that don't mean anything because we know how the world really works. And I just couldn't do, and it's mostly dudes. It's mostly like, 20 something through middle-aged dudes.
Yeah.
And
right.
It's toxic as shit. A lot of it overlaps with like the men's rights movement and stuff like that. Some of the harder edge, like libertarianism, and there's just a whole lot of these like toxic currents that these people sort of thrive on, and they get off on, and their followers get off on it too. And if you say you're going to go out there and march against racism or something like that, they think it's ridiculous. They think it's silly, and you're a normie sheeple. And I just find that kind of revolting, because you're
an NPC. You're a non-playable
an NPC,
character.
right? Yeah.
Right,
Oh God.
Right. Yeah.
Oh,
The thing is with all that, and Sergio and I have talked about this in many private conversations. The thing about that is that these people, these same people and those same ideas is all shit that you could find in that Senate report of memes the Russians were sending over, the IRA, the Internet Research Agency that they had over there.
Oh, yeah.
It was the same. It's all the same kind of shit. So it's funny. They're the ones that they're talking about you being manipulated or us being manipulated. They're being manipulated.
Right. And it's like the conspiracy theorists, especially the hard right, like crypto fascist types, they can't imagine that they are being conspiracized, that the stuff that they're parroting
it's
and
meta
sharing, it's totally meta,
second order, and they just
right.
It's a hurdle that many of them cannot comprehend.
They can't do it. And I've tried to engage with some of these people, and it's really kind of pointless, to the point where I just really pulled back. Like I'll shine a spotlight on them if I think there's some dangerous shit that they're saying, and I have no problem with that. And if you want to call it cancel culture, well, feel free. But I think if you're saying stuff and someone else just shines a light on what you're saying and people react to that, that's not cancel culture. That's consequences. Like if I started railing about how Jews control Hollywood and someone, in my like private member group or something like that, and someone called me out for it, that's not cancel culture. That's just like saying, hey man, Michael Hughes has lost his mind. He's going off about the Jews controlling Hollywood, and I should be exposed for that sort of thing.
Well, one thing I've seen more than anything characterize a lot of this new scene is just the relative newness to all this. And I feel like we kind of have the same background, been into these speculative cultures for decades, and it's really hard to find a lot of people who've been in this stuff for decades who don't develop a more nuanced view of things, who, don't become more skeptical when they hear a new conspiracy theory. And, I just think it's a lack of historical perspective, and it's a lot of people who just recently got politicized, who just recently got turned on to this stuff through the internet, through the social media stuff especially, and it's just different. But I think we have an opportunity for like old school people like us to do things like what Robert Guffey did with his Salon articles, and like taking a deep dive and helping the normies understand how this stuff kind of really develops and takes hold in people, and how we can kind of counter it. I think it's something that we can do as kind of the old school.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've learned. We've been in this stuff for a long time, and we've seen. We've seen what happens to just looking at UFO culture when, Behold a Pale Horse came out, and people reading that. I saw like a guy on a bus one day writing that, and I'm like, holy shit, that book is still around, but we've seen these things happen. Like we've been in it long enough that we can start to smell when something's going rancid and going bad. And, David Icke, I remember, I started listening to David Icke and bought one of his books, and I didn't know any better. I was just like, it was just a whole hodgepodge of conspiracies. And then I started seeing like, the undercurrents and all that. And I realized that this guy was, way, way, way off his rocker. I had a good friend of mine who was like a new age healer person. She wrote a book about this like light entity that came into her life called the Teacher. And, it was really just kind of standard new age fare. And she started, she got a guest appearance on the Jeff Rentz show. Yeah. I don't know if you remember his website and his radio show. And I mean, pure Nazi, like he had like Ernst Zundel and Holocaust deniers on there. And she became a rabid anti-Semite. And I had to break off my friendship with her. I'm like, you've lost your mind, So we've seen these things happen. So I think we start to see when things start going south or going in a really bad direction. And I do think it's up to us to kind of help some of these people, get their shit together and try to get them to start thinking a little more logically and to develop that kind of discernment that you need if you want to stay into this stuff. We need to do it. Like, it's up to us old guys, because but we can only do so much. It's people get deep, and they get brainwashed, and they get led. A lot of charismatic people slinging this stuff.
Well, you had one that you kind of went after just recently, and he was like physically threatening, inciting his own kind of mob.
Yeah, there've been lots of that. I mean, I was getting it from all sides with like the Trump binding spell, which I thought maybe 20 or 30 people would find amusing or take part or whatever. But, I was getting it from the evangelical death threats from the evangelical Trumpers, but I was also getting it from the occult community too, which I found kind of interesting. I mean, curses and all this sort of thing. And, recently after the invasion of the Capitol, and, when I saw guys with like zip ties and stuff running around in there and putting a noose up on the Capitol property, and it was quite obvious what they were there to do. And I just decided I couldn't not say anything anymore. So there was a particular occultist recently, Gordon White. He's got a blog called Rune Soup. I loved Gordon. I was on a show. I did a tarot show with him. I interviewed him on Soraya's show, Where'd the Road Go?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. I mean, I was like fanboy because I thought his writing on magic was really good. I still think it is. I mean, he's a great writer. He's a super smart guy, but he started going really weirdly to the right before the 2016 election, which is fine. But some of the stuff he was saying was, clearly like nonsensical about Hillary, as he called her, and things like that, and kind of, giving Trump a pass like a lot of these allegedly non-political people do. But then he started, because I still got his newsletters, he started going off about like COVID was a psyop and it wasn't real. And you're going to hear things on the internet like your hairdresser's cousin died of COVID, but don't believe it. And like I said, I work with a lot of public health people. I was seeing what was happening, and to have someone, saying this pandemic was a Bill Gates psyop or something. I mean, first of all, it's the same shit the QAnon people are saying. So you might say QAnon is ridiculous, but if you're basically parroting the same propaganda that they are, then you're just no better than them. So the anti-COVID stuff just got worse and worse. And then, so some of the people in his members only group started sending me stuff because I was publicly kind of questioning what he was saying. And they're like, you would not believe what this guy's saying in this private group. And I said, well, tell me. Yeah, behind the paywall. So people are paying to hear this. So they sent me a video, and I suffered through the whole thing. There was some terrible stuff like saying doctors are sheep and cowards, just terrible stuff, putting down public health workers. And but then he's got all these predictions that he's making that Biden's going to lock. First he said Trump was, his prediction was Trump was going to win, but then he was wrong about that. And then Biden's going to lock us all down in our homes in February. But the very last thing at the end, and this is what people said, you got to listen to the end of it. He said, people who are telling us to, wear masks and, stay home and, of social distance and all that, he said, better shut the fuck up. He said, for their own safety. He said, because what happens to scolds like that. He says they get put up against the wall like prison guards and snitches. And then again, he said, I'm saying this for their own safety. Shut the fuck up. And, I'm beating myself in the head forever, for praising this guy in the past and being on his show and buying, 3 of his books that he's published, to find out that, he's saying that, people that I work with in the field of public health who are trying to keep people alive, doctors and nurses and epidemiologists, that because they're telling people to do the right thing during this, what he calls a hoax pandemic, that they should be put up against a wall, like prison guards and snitches, and shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up for your own safety. Shut the fuck up. And that's when a lot of people said, okay, I'm done. Like, I'm out of your group. But it's the perfect example of conspirituality. It's a person who's very charismatic, smart, brilliant speaker. The guy can just speak off the cuff on all kinds of subjects and sounds brilliant. But when you're saying, when people are paying you and you're having these ridiculously dangerous fantasies about, killing people because they told you that you shouldn't have a birthday party with like your extended family, that's really bad. That deserves to be known. And a lot of smart people appear on his show, and he's published by a major publisher. One of my publishers published my nonfiction book, and I think, people have to take that into consideration if you want to give a platform to somebody that is advocating, first of all, ignoring a pandemic and not being like a good citizen and trying not to sicken other people, if not just yourself, but having these violent fantasies about, and he talked about insurrection. There's going to be an insurrection against these public health restrictions. And he says, not time yet, but that time will come. And it's like, no, man, you know what? If you have a responsibility, if you have a group of people who believe the things that you say and who kind of look at you as a teacher, and you're out there telling them dangerous stuff like this, I'm sorry, you need to be exposed for doing that. And in the past, I might have let that sort of thing slide. But after watching these yahoos with zip ties and stun guns, on the hunt for blood of people that we elected in this country, and an election that we were trying to to just finish fair and square. Nah, we can't just let that kind of stuff pass anymore. That's.
Here's the thing, Mike, that he's from Australia, isn't he? Isn't he in Australia?
He was British. I think he's living in Tasmania now.
Okay, so he's living in a country that has pretty much figured COVID out, that has pretty much gone back to normal because of certain restrictions that were in place. So as you're talking about this, I'm just thinking to myself, what he's doing is he's playing to the American audience.
Yeah. And a lot of what he does is based on this guy named Martin Armstrong, who's like a convicted financial criminal that has this computer, it's like Nostradamus type computer that's supposed to predict future trends and all this stuff. So it's like built on half-baked nonsense anyway. But come on, man, you want to talk about like occultism and stuff like that, great. You want to talk about chaos magic, great. But when you're talking about insurrection against people who are trying to keep people alive during a global pandemic, and you're airing your own violent fantasies about what you want to do to these folks, you've blown all credibility. And if I was a publisher, I would say, sorry, man, like, I'm not touching your book anymore. And that's not cancel culture. Like, if I was a publisher, I would not publish the Turner Diaries. The most vile book I ever read, the most eye-opening book I've ever read about like the far right. I would not publish stuff about Holocaust revisionism. So you make a decision. I'm not the government censoring someone if I'm a publisher, and somebody has these, is preaching these violent fantasies and telling people not to wear a mask and to rise up against doctors and nurses around the world who are trying to, keep everybody alive as best they can, putting their own lives at risk. So, I mean, that was just the most recent sort of tip of the iceberg. But it's an indication of this really dark trend in conspiracy and spiritual communities. And, it just, at that point when I read that, I said, I can't shut up about this. Like, people need to know this is what this guy is saying.
Yeah, I'm totally not interested in having a Holocaust denier or a QAnon person, like, even on the show. Like, there's no point, like, oh, I need to air their point of view. Like, no, I don't. Like, their point of view is out there, and there's plenty of other shows that are doing that. Unfortunately,
too many, and so many of the conspiracy shows have tilted so far right, and even podcast and radio shows in the paranormal world and stuff like that are infected with this too. And I think it's just up to us as like reasonable people in our communities to yes, call this stuff out when we see it. I'm not saying, burn someone. I'm not saying shut them down so that they can't publish again or anything like that. I'm just saying, let's at least get a grip on what's going on in our communities, shine a light on like the egregious stuff that's going on, but do the right thing, which is promote shows like yours, where you take care to screen out, obvious garbage or anti-Semitism or just racism and things like that. Like, we don't need to hear that. There's no mandate to give every person a say. We have platforms, so we should. And there's so much good, interesting stuff out there. There's no reason to give the people who are pushing hateful ideology. They let them start their own shows.
I mean, we've really been in the middle of it and really had to take a stand about a lot of different issues that have been forced to the forefront, and we've actually found that in doing that, we have gotten like way more appreciation and engagement from the fans, because they know like Conspirinormal is a place for weirdos, for people who like to speculate and they're into weird stuff, but they're not gonna get that garbage, and so it's really helped us. We were worried a lot because we did try to toe the line so much before and not come across as overtly political, etc., but it just got to that point, and once we really started setting those boundaries and really coming out and being more open about how we felt about things, we got a better response. So
yeah, because you're being reasonable people, and you're not just like those podcasts to go, oh, this guy talks about subject X and he might be a little racist, but hey, he's got a big following, so we'll bring him on anyway. And I'm not, a friend of mine in our shared communities, was going off on me like, what are you, like, making lists of people now? Like, and I'm like, well, we always make lists of people, like if I heard someone come on your show and say like despicable things, that person's on my list of someone I don't want to listen to anymore. I'm not advocating like censorship. I'm advocating that we're just aware, and we take note of people who are saying really awful things or saying really dangerous things, and we just, if maybe invite someone else instead of that person. It's not cancel culture if what you're saying is so egregious and horrifying that people don't want to associate with you. That's not cancel culture. That's just, all right, I don't like what you're saying, so I don't want to listen to you anymore. And that goes for people with platforms too. We do it all the time. I mean, if you have a guest who's totally, off his or her rocker, you don't have them on. But again, it's not good for your reputation. So you just, that's not canceling. That's just being selective about who we feature and who we give a platform to.
Right. And I think for me, just personally, and Sergio and I've talked about this, that like once COVID really hit, it seemed to be like you knew kind of like what side you were on. Like it seemed like people got along, you got along with these people, you were okay with them. And then all of a sudden they just start coming out with these just weird ideas. And for us, it was just like, no guys, like no, this is not how this is going to be. And the whole thing with COVID, what blows my mind about it, as much denial as there has been about it, that like I grew up in this kind of this conspiracy culture of like, oh, the big change is going to come, and like the big life shattering change, Red Dawn is coming or whatever. And then all of a sudden, here it is, conspiracy freaks. This is what you've been waiting for. And it's like, no, it's not real. The one thing that like actually was the big life-changing event wasn't the big life-changing event for them.
And it's easy. Like it's easy as like a person who's been immersed in conspiracy theory for so long to look at when something like this happens, a global pandemic, right? You can easily find this scientist is saying this scientist is saying this, and start to think, oh, well, this is bullshit because they're saying two different things. It's like when there's a mass shooting, right? And someone says, I saw 2 people run from the building, and somebody else says, oh no, I saw 3 people. And before you know it, the conspiracy theorists are jumping on that and going, see, it's a false flag. Because that person said they saw 2 people, that person said they saw 1 person, and that doesn't add up. So clearly we're being hoodwinked here. When really, chaotic things happen, people get different, people think they see something, like it's like the game of, telephone where someone says, and so there are always inconsistencies because it's chaos. And that doesn't mean just because there's inconsistencies that it's some kind of plot and it's falling apart, and that you can, just because one person says something and the other says something. So multiply that by this pandemic that, first of all, China is, kind of trying to tamp down on because they don't want to look bad, and they're kind of an authoritarian, country, to put it mildly. And then you've got a virus that no one's ever seen before. So some people are saying wear a mask. Some people are saying no, it's transferred. So, you're getting all of these different, bits of information. So if you're a conspiracy-oriented person, you go, see, it's a lot. And you look for that one weird little glitch in all that information. You go, aha, see, well, wow, see, Bill Gates, he was, he's got the Gates Foundation for immunization, and wow, so now there's this big plague, so that means Bill Gates involved, and you just start cooking up all this stuff. So the more chaos there is, the easier it is to buy into and we want a clean narrative. Like it's so easy right now with these variants of COVID popping up. I've seen some of the conspiratorial people say, see, now they're saying it's variants. The whole idea is just to keep you wearing a mask so you breathe your own carbon dioxide and you get dumber and then they'll give you the Bill Gates vaccine, and we'll all be controlled by 5G, yada, 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 whatever they're saying. So it's in a time of chaos is the prime time for people to start, kind of glomming on to conspiracies, because they're like, aha, see, variants now, right? Oh, just when the vaccine comes out, now there's variants out, and now that means we're just going to have to hunker down, and they're trying to destroy small businesses, and and it goes on and on and on. So it is the perfect storm. I mean, the Trump cult and COVID. I mean, if you were the Illuminati, and that you have just had your most brilliant master strokes.
Yeah,
by doing that.
It really was something that couldn't have happened at the worst possible time.
Yep.
In our history.
Exactly.
With probably the worst possible person
right.
to handle it. Truly. I mean, we're going to look back on it, and we're going to see that.
I agree. The other thing I wanted to say real quick is that, yes, it's the worst time it could have happened, but I took a microbiology class like back in 1992 or something like that, and in that class, I'll never forget, we were talking about climate change and the acceleration of like microbes and pandemics, and especially microbes that jump from animals to humans, and especially in like wet markets and stuff like that. And that's the thing, like people have been running around warning about this stuff for decades now. But you're so right. Like if you could find the absolute worst time to throw a global pandemic on people, wow, it certainly couldn't have been planned better by the Illuminati if they were trying to do this.
Yeah, that's very, very true. I wanted to ask you a question about something. We're going to do a little Patreon segment about this, maybe myself and Serfiel, but this is on the Netflix series Surviving Death. And I know that you've watched the part that I'm going to ask you about, which is the part about mediums. And like, you're a mentalist. We talked about that, I think, in the first episode I ever had you on. God, that was probably like 2015 or something now. But what are your thoughts on that? Because, it I found myself just kind of tuning out on those episodes, honestly.
Yeah, mediumship is a difficult subject for me. First of all, because I'm not completely opposed to the idea that people can maybe tap into spirits of the dead. I don't inherently reject that at all. I've read a lot of books about some of the early investigations of the Society for Psychical Research and some of the mediums, like back in the 19th century and things like that. And it's pretty fascinating stuff. And those guys weren't just, easily hoodwinked, people. They were scientists, and in some of the cases, they tested some of the mediums in bright light and did their best to rule out trickery. And we know Houdini was, like the king of the exposers. So there was always a skeptical element. But for me, mediumship is one of the, because I've studied mentalism, and that includes things like cold reading, which is when just in a conversation with somebody, you kind of feed them little bits of information and you watch how they react, and then you pull, and you can do a lot with cold reading. Like you can be a great medium and just be a cold reader and have people walk away thinking, oh my God, that person just was talking to Uncle Charlie. There's also hot reading, which is when it used to be a lot harder, because let's say someone would get your name and they know you're coming for the reading, they get your phone number. Well, they would maybe find out where you worked. They could look in some public records where they'd have to go to the library or the city hall or something like that and dig up stuff about you. And there were definitely readers that did that sort of thing. But now, as we saw on that show, and thankfully they left that part in, I think it was the Dutch medium did this reading for a family, and, the family are, like, suitably impressed and blown away. But then they showed them in conversation going, you know what? All that stuff she said was on Facebook. And I'm so glad they left that in, because at one point the medium turned to the guy and said, do you like cars? And he's like, oh, like, yes. Yeah, I like cars. Did you have an ugly green car once? She's like, oh my God. Yeah. You really are Uncle Charlie. And then they showed scrolling through his Facebook feed, there's a whole bunch of cars, and there's the image of his ugly green car, and, his text like, hey man, I had this ugly green gremlin back in 1979 or whatever. And I thought I'm surprised they left that in there, because I think the emphasis of the show is on the reality of consciousness surviving death. I was really shocked that they left that in there. And that medium, I have to say, I had kind of a gut reaction to anyway. Her voices just seemed really cheesy. I also, the physical mediums are also the ones who are, I think, most inclined to do fakery, and the fact that you have to get inside a spirit cabinet, which is, from the 19th century thing. And
they wouldn't let them film either.
Right. And you can't film, of course, because the spirits don't like the cameras.
Yeah.
It has to be in darkness and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, being a mentalist and knowing so much of the fakery that can be done and how easy it is really makes me always inherently skeptical of mediumship. I've also talked to people who've gone to visit mediums who have had like profound experiences and messages that seemed absolutely impossible, that weren't on social media or anything like that. So I'm not absolutely skeptical, but when you see how easy it is for some of these folks to get information nowadays, because we're putting everything about ourselves out on the internet. And there's just, like, if you got on my Facebook feed, you could scroll through it for, 10 years and find all these crazy stuff about me that I forgot that I even put up there, probably. So I like Leslie Kean. I think she's done some good journalism when it comes to UFOs. I read the book Surviving Death. I think there's some really interesting information in there. Especially the near-death experiences. I think her stuff about reincarnation, there's some really mind-blowing cases. I think a lot of that's really good, but I think she got too tight with the mediumship community. And whenever you get tight with a community like that, I think you tend to sometimes overlook some stuff, or maybe put your objectivity aside a little bit. So I think it was good that they left that bit of, what might be called exposure in there. I think it's really important for people to see that and to realize there are people who want to con you out there. And a lot of these mediums charge a lot of money, hundreds of dollars just to sit with them for an hour or so. That's a pretty damn good gig. And the other thing I always say to anyone, whether you're especially when you're investigating someone who's allegedly has any sort of psychic powers, take a magician or a mentalist. They know how to fool people. If you take a doctor doesn't know how the trickery's done. If he could be the smartest surgeon in the world, but he doesn't know, like a simple sleight of hand move that can, exchange a piece of paper that you've written on for another one that then this person can read. Or, so it's just critical, I think, for any sort of investigation of the paranormal to take a mentalist or a magician, or, two, if you can. And we've seen before, there was magician named Banachek, who I've met a few times, a mentalist, and he fooled the SRI team. Randy, he did it with Randy, like he collaborated with James Randi, and they went. I think they fooled like Hal Puthoff, and I hope I'm right about this. That was the crew that he fooled. But Banachek, as he's known, went in and fooled the pants off these guys under allegedly controlled conditions. And so you just need someone who knows the trickery. And it's a funny anecdote. At another one of these Fortean conferences I went to, used to be called the Fort Fest, held in Baltimore. I did like a psychic demonstration for the group, and I said, okay, I'm going to do this psychic demonstration, but it's all trickery. And it's the best material that I had. Like, it seems absolutely impossible. Like, someone would write something down on a piece of paper and fold it up and stick it in their pocket, and I'd never see it, the name of like an old friend or something like that. And I'd go up to them and start talking to them, and I'd say, your friend Butchie. And they'd be like, oh my God, how did you know that? How did you know that? And even though I told them all this stuff that I was doing was trickery, several of them came up afterwards like, man, that wasn't a trick. I'm like, yeah, no, it was a trick. I promise. No, there's no way that could have been a trick. So it really taught me that not only is it easy to, and I don't I would never pretend to talk to somebody's dead uncle, even though I could do it. I just think that's exploitive and horrible and unethical as anything. But it really did taught me that when people want to believe something, you can fool the pants off of them, and they will, to the ends of the earth, they will say that you are an absolute brilliant psychic and you did talk to Aunt Molly, and it's just amazing human psychology. Like, when we want to believe something, the lengths we will go to believe it.
Yeah, I wonder about the therapeutic aspect of it, whether that it does have its own kind of place.
Mm-hmm.
That people, that it's its own form of therapy.
It is, and so many of us want to believe that when we die, there's something else. And we want to believe that when someone we love or care about dies, that they're still out there somehow,
right,
watching over us or able to communicate with us. And that may very well be true. I mean, there's plenty of pretty solid, interesting data that shows that, I certainly would not rule it out, just to say that much. So, and it does, maybe going to a fraudulent medium and she, talks in a cute little voice and pretends to be that child you lost, who was 4 when she died. And you feel like you've made a connection with her and she tells you it's all right. And that's what a lot of these messages are from these mediums. Like, I'm okay. I'm still there with you. I still love you. One day we're going to be together again. So just be happy now. It is therapeutic. And so that's like the weird ethical line. If it makes people feel better, is it wrong that maybe they're being a fraud about it? Maybe some of these people, they know they're frauds, but they still feel like they're doing, a really healing thing for someone. I read tarot cards professionally for people. Some people think that's fraudulent, but I just put cards down and I say what I see. And sometimes that's helpful for people, and makes them feel better. I don't intentionally do it to make them feel better, but with a tarot card reading or something, it's more of like a conversation between two people. You're looking at these symbols and you're having a conversation, you're having a dialogue about what you see. And that could be really healing for people. It can help them think about their problems. I don't necessarily say I'm like seeing their future, but I do say that, like, when I put down some cards, sometimes because of those images, things come to the surface. that are happening to them or that they're worried about or whatever, and we have a conversation and they go away. And so maybe mediumship is kind of similar to that. I just couldn't do it. Like I couldn't, it just profoundly unethical to me to maybe look up somebody's stuff on Facebook and then go, hey, what about that time your cousin Billy and was in the pool with you and he hit you on the head with a rock? And I just couldn't do that.
How'd you know? People want to believe.
I've had some interesting experiences with tarot, but every time that I have those experiences, there is still that thing in the back of my mind of just like, well, maybe this is just me, my own psychology, putting what I think my interpretation, the person interpreting it, and then my interpretation of that interpretation.
Right. I consider it a dialogue. Like when I teach people tarot and how to read cards, stuff like that, I'm like, it's a conversation. You're looking at pictures and talking to each other about things you think and you see and you feel. And that's, what's wrong with that? I mean, as long as you're not saying, oh, the cards say, do not marry that person or your life will be hell, or you're going to die, or no, the cards say you don't have cancer, stuff like that. I mean, there's certain things I just don't go to, but the tarot is weird. There was a period, you just made me think of this when you said, things that happened to you. There was a period of several months where every day it comes and goes with me in tarot. I don't draw cards every day. Like, I have phases where I use it more or not. But there was a period of a couple of months, I think probably close to about 3 years ago now, where I would just start taking like one card a day. I'd shuffle the deck up and I'd take a card. And sometimes I would just use the 22 major cards and leave the others aside, whatever. But so one day I draw the death card. My one card is a death card. Like, put the card back. Next day, my one card draw, shuffle them all again, the death card. The next day, my one card draw, shuffle them again, the death card. It got to the point, and this was weeks, not every day, but like every couple of days, that I would just steel myself and I'd go, I'm just going to laugh if it's the goddamn death card again. And I'd shuffle, and then I'd shuffle again. And I'd go, okay, I'm going to cut it one more time. Damn if it wasn't the death card. And I'm not like a fatalistic weirdo when it comes to things like that. I was getting a little freaked out. Like, what does it mean to keep drawing the death card? Like, what is going on here? The probability of that happening so many times out of a completely shuffled deck of cards was just baffling to me. But eventually, I mean, I think I just stopped. I was just like, all right, I'm not doing this anymore. But when weird stuff like that happens, you're like, I don't even understand why it happened or have a reason why it happened. I don't think anyone was going to die or it meant anything about a new beginning for me or anything like that. It was just a quirky, weird synchronicity thing that just kept happening. And, when you work with tarot for long enough, sometimes crazy stuff like that happens. Like you'll keep drawing the same card, over and over for days, or you do readings for 10 people and the same card keeps coming up in the same place, stuff like that. So it's fascinating. I have no answer. I don't know why that happens, but it's really weird.
Well, Mike, this has been awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming on and doing this. We covered a lot of ground, I think, a lot of good things that needed to be said. Where can people find your books, find you, all that good stuff?
Sure. Well, I'm everywhere. I'm not really an Instagram person, but Facebook and Twitter, I'm pretty easily findable on Twitter. Michael M. Hughes. My website is michaelmhughes.com, and you can find links to my books there, my fiction as well as the nonfiction. And I just want to thank you guys because it's like, there's fewer and fewer podcasts, I think, that have really kind of resisted some of the really troubling trends, especially in the weird community. And I just think you guys do just a bang up job, like being skeptical, but appropriately open-minded and, respectful interviewers and things like that. So I am always happy to come on and chat with you, because it's fewer and far between these days.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. I think that's a good place to end it. All right. Stay on the line for us, Mike. We're going to close this section out. We'll be back to close out this interesting show on Conspirinormal. All right, guys, welcome back to Conspirinormal. We're here to briefly close out the show. And that was a very, very good, interesting interview with Michael Hughes. I really enjoyed that.
Some very relatable discussion. We've kind of been at the front lines of a lot of the very things we were talking about. So
yeah, a very, very timely discussion as well. It kind of goes back to other discussions that we've had with like Robert Guffey and Eric Davis and a few other people too. So you almost might want to take those and listen to all three of those, and also maybe our recent Dr. Future interview too. So it all kind of like goes together, and some of the things that we're hitting. I just think it's important. I think it's important for people to understand where we feel about this, and some of these podcasters that are out there that are basically, I mean, they're making their audience happy, and I get that, but some of the damage that could be caused is, well, we don't know the ramifications of that. So hopefully that I don't know, I just wish we could live in like calmer times, but it kind of is what it is right now. So
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think that the times that we come from with the generation of these cultures that we're from, I think those times were kind of easier to coexist with people with extreme political opinions, and kept a lot of things kind of at a safe distance that I think has been made pretty much impossible now. And I think that has a lot to do with how things have changed.
Hey guys, we've talked a lot about this on our Patreon. If you guys want to go back and listen to that, if you already are a Patreon, if you are not, consider becoming one. But at the beginning of this year, back last month now in January, we did 3 episodes just kind of about all this kind of things that are going on. So go back and check those out. So if you like, tell everybody how they could go to our Patreon.
Yeah, every week we have a fresh new Patreon episode for you. Those are for our $5 and up patrons, who are the International Association of Conspirinormalists. That's the $5 level. Gets you a patron episode every week, as well as other goodies, including a membership button and secret communications from the center of the order. We did just enjoy our first ball of the Mystic Crew, which is a monthly hangout for our $10 and up patrons. We had a lot of fun in that. We just kind of partied and talked, but in the following ones, which there's going to be one every month, we are going to have special guests and presentations, games, raffles, things like that, and give you access to us and guests of the show. And at the $20 level is the Ancient Circle of Strange Realities. That gets you an exclusive t-shirt not available on the TeePublic site, gets you all the previous privileges and VIP experiences at the Strange Realities Conference in whatever form that takes this year. You also get access to the recordings of the previous conferences. And we just really want to thank everybody. It's been really successful since we've instituted this new Patreon regime. And if you're at any of those lower levels, consider upping your pledge. It really helps. We're getting some technical stuff upgraded here, so it should be we should be beginning to have improved audio quality, and looking for other improvements as well. We reached our $500 goal, which we just really want to thank everybody for. And really helps us expand this and invest in the strange realities and the show. We really appreciate it, guys.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for helping us out, and we are going to be trying to give you as much content as we possibly can. Speaking of which, join us this coming Friday or Saturday. We are going to be, from the time that this posts, we are going to be talking on our Patreon about the Surviving Death miniseries, documentary series on Netflix, and just some of our thoughts about it. So join us there. And next week, Christopher Ernst is going to join us. We'll be back next time with Conspirinormal.
If you would like to help the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/conspiranormal, or leave a one-time donation at conspiranormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspiranormal Podcast.